Okay guys, today we're going to be doing spark plugs on a 2017 Hyundai Accent. We're going to pull these locking tabs on all four of the connectors that go to the ignition coils. And that's how we'll start this. Okay, got all those freed up. We're going to go ahead and lift each connector. 2, 3, and then 4 over here. Gonna go ahead and remove this hose clamp and pull the breather hose off the valve cover. Now we're gonna remove the 10 millimeters on all four of the ignition coils. You're gonna have to remove this connector on the high pressure fuel pump. We're gonna spin and lift all these. They do tend to get stuck on some occasions, so try to spin them back and forth before you lift them straight out. So I stick this 6-inch extension in here with a 16 millimeter socket, and I always break them free by hand with a ratchet, just get them kind of loose before I use a electric ratchet or electric gun to take them the rest of the way out. And now I spin them out with a 3/8 ratchet. That's 1, that's 2, that's 3, and that's 4. So in some cases I'll use the little electric claw that you just seen, but I'm going to use a magnet just to pull these out real quick. And I'll use that little claw that you've seen, and I'll show you what it is, to reinstall them so you don't just drop them in, because the spark plugs, when you get them new, they are pre-gapped, and I check the gap before I install them too, so I highly suggest you do too. Okay, so now that I have all the brand new spark plugs, I'm going to go ahead and put a very little bit of anti-seize on all four of the spark plugs. It is 116 degrees out where I'm at, so this is dripping everywhere. But I'm going to do the best I can to apply it, just a very little to each one, and not make too much of a mess to clean up. Okay, so it's made a little bit of a mess, but you don't want to put too much on there, just enough to get you by. I'm gonna have to wipe some of this stuff up because it's spilled pretty much almost everywhere. But I'm gonna put these two together to kind of mix some of that around. But you just want to put a little bit on each spark plug to prevent them from seizing. And this is that claw tool I use to grab the back of it. It's pretty much like a spring. It goes ahead and lets me drop it in very easily. So once it bottoms out, I just kind of let go. You just literally just push down. It's like literally a mini flexible claw that just lets me grab these spark plugs and just set them right in there. and then I'll thread them in there by hand with that same 16mm socket and the 6-inch extension. And then I'll go ahead and spin them in until they're snug, not even hitting anything, just so I can tighten them in by hand, because you don't want to try to torque these in with a electric ratchet. You don't want to try to torque them in with a 3/8 battery operated ratchet, because you don't want them to be over tightened and you don't want to break anything. So I have my 3/8 ratchet with a small extension. It's touch sensitive, so there's no noise when it comes to when it stops. It just stops. I'm not forcing it any further. I'll do the rest by hand, and that way I know they're already in good. And I can come in by hand and torque them by feel. I mean, I've been doing this for a very long time, so I pretty much just torque them to where I feel the washer is crushed and I feel tightness, and then I do a little, maybe a 1/4 inch turn after. You can always look up the torque spec. I always tell people, if you feel more comfortable with it, to look up the torque spec that works for you. Me, I've been doing it for long enough on these vehicles to where I can literally do it by touch. Unless it's European vehicles, then I do torque to spec exactly. This is dielectrical grease. I do add it to each ignition coil. You don't have to. I do it to prevent any kind of condensation or moisture from building up in there and corroding the springs that transfer the electric signal from the ignition coil to the spark plug. It's merely just because precautionary reasons. I would do this to my vehicle. So if you are doing this to your vehicle or a customer's vehicle, I highly suggest you do it as well. So here I'm literally just reinstalling the ignition coils. I'm going to go ahead and screw those 10mm all back in. And then I'm going to go ahead and hook up each electrical connector back to where it goes, including the high pressure fuel pump, before I even do the 4th ignition coil, the 3rd, and I check the connection after each time I install it just to verify, because if there's any kind of breakage, you always want to replace that electrical connector to prevent a misfire. Rehook up the breather and reinstall the clamp. I can squeeze these back on with my fingers, but I still like to use pliers just to be sure. And that's how you do the spark plugs.